Well, hello there and welcome to this video, which is on how to write good documentation for web development technologies. So, I suppose just for the benefit of anyone who hasn't been here before, I should say a little word about who you're listening to. So, my name is David Connolly, but you can call me the web developer extraordinaire. And as far as documentation goes for frameworks and other web development technologies, I think that I have credentials coming out of my ears. I happen to be the founder of a framework called Trongate. Here it is here. And I happen to be the guy who wrote at least the first edition of the Trongate docs, all of this stuff here. And to top it all off, I've got a degree in English literature from somewhere. So I've spent my time looking at great writers, and I think I've got some idea of what good writing looks like. Now, you probably think that I'm going to be telling you about how I've been so perfect at this and everything is great and isn't it fantastic? Well, here's the news flash. I can tell you that writing the documentation for the Trongate framework is one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my whole career. It took ages. It was so difficult. It was over 200 pages. And you probably think I'm going to say, oh, but it all went well in the end. Well, actually, no. You see, I failed. I botched it up completely. I got all of this wrong. All of it. Look at it. It's all wrong. Tons and tons of work. Wrong, wrong, all wrong. All time wasted. And it was indeed one of the biggest mistakes of my whole career. I got it wrong. So much for the credentials, right? Well, in this video, I'm going to go through how to do this right, because I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope that I can save you some trouble, because it turns out that writing documentation is nothing like ordinary writing. You may have an idea of what good writing looks like, but let's chuck it in for our first patronising bit of text here. Good writing does not equal good docs. And somebody out there is being really smug and saying that I should do that, and fair enough. But these two things are not the same. So I want to go over a couple of the details, and then at the end of this video, I'm going to introduce you to a sort of conspiracy theory that I've got about documentation. Well, maybe I won't do this at the end, but there's something about docs that nobody's talking about. Nobody has ever spoken about. And that is the great revelation that docs are not intended for the person who's going to be using the technology. You're like, what? You hang tough and all shall be revealed. So, good writing does not equal good docs. Going back to my favourite topic for a little moment, me. One of the things that I've always prided myself upon is that I'm good at explaining stuff, you know? And I think I'm good at explaining stuff because I'm not an academic genius or a marvel of modern day science, but I've spent a lot of time being a confused guy trying to learn things, you know? But over the years, I mean, I have certain party pieces. I've said to my friends, look, I'm going to teach you computing. I'll teach you programming. They say, I don't know about computers. And I'll say to them, okay, listen, Charlie. Every time I say multi-dimensional array, I want you to replace that phrase with a bunch of stuff. Okay, Charlie? That's all you have to do, Charlie. So, if I say we're going to need a multi-dimensional array, I want you to hear we're going to need a bunch of stuff. Anyway, I've had those conversations. I'm good at them. And at the end of those conversations, people are like, oh, that's amazing, you know? So the point is, I know that I'm good at teaching. But guess what? That is not good docs. None of it is. And it's not appropriate for docs either. You see, the thing about docs, and I might as well take you straight to the punchline. The thing about docs is that docs are not for the person learning the technology. It took me 2 years, knowledge. It took me 2 years to get this. Nobody told me. And I had to figure it out, and it blew my mind. And there were 2 mistakes that I made with the original Trongate docs, and I'm not going to go through it all and bore you, but just to give you an idea. The thing is that I made a couple of mistakes. One of the mistakes is that there was a lot of sort of opinionated stuff. Like I had a big giant page on Welcome to the Revolution and talking about the state of web development. I had, take for example, a few words about coding style. And then, look at the subheadline. Well, relax, you're using Trongate, Code in a way that makes you feel good. This is actually well written, but it's not good docs. In fact, actually, it was a disaster. And so the first mistake that I made, and the first mistake that lots of people make with docs, is they add in opinions. That's a huge mistake. Like they'll talk about the state of web development, or, the trouble with text editors is blah, 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 blah. All of that is in the category of opinions, and it does not belong inside documentation. Now, another mistake that a lot of people make, and I've made it as well, is to try and teach people about stuff that's beyond the scope of the documentation. So here's a word about MariaDB and MySQL. Well, actually, that's possibly reasonable because I'm just clarifying terminology. But a lot of the time, and I do it throughout this docs, I'll teach a concept that's not part of the documentation, like how to install XAMPP or the history of PHP or something like that. And it absolutely does not belong inside documentation. And that's a shame. I've been working on the new Trongate documentation, and I have these 2 pictures that I'm desperate to use. Getting these pictures was a lot of work. Let me show you them. I'm so desperate. This is Laravel, by the way. You see this? This is Laravel. That's kind of like the competition, Some people might laugh, say you're not doing a good job of competing, but that's another PHP framework, right? Look at how complicated that is. And this, if I can bring my little folder up, this is Trongate. And as you can see, Trongate is a whole lot more simple than Laravel if I put them side by side. You see? And you may think, well, why does that matter? Well, if we look at the benchmarks, Trongate is really, really fast compared to these other frameworks. So I'm desperate to talk about this stuff. I want this in the docs. At least in the introduction, right? Well, no. You see, it turns out that all falls into the category of waffle, and the worst type of waffle, which is opinionated waffle. So the 2 enemies, the 2 great enemies of docs are 1, opinionated waffle, and 2, going beyond the scope of the docs. So, here's a quick lesson on PHP or something like that for a framework. It's not appropriate. So that's us, and if there are typos here, I'm going to be really embarrassed. But those are the 2 mistakes that I've made. And those mistakes have cost me dearly. In fact, all of this is going to have to be redone because I made these two mistakes. And the funny thing is, the original docs are well written. But remember, folks, good writing does not equal good docs. So, now I've covered a whole lot of stuff that I think at least alludes to what the challenges are when it comes to writing docs. But now let's talk about the good stuff or the positive. I've said that docs are not for the person learning the technology. So if there's some average guy out there who's thinking about learning Trongate, don't read the docs. That's right, don't read the docs. You'll probably be wasting your time. So the question then is, who are we writing for? Okay, now this is a key question and nobody ever talks about this. But I'm going to give you the truth and I'm going to tell you a huge secret. You're not writing for the end user. You are writing for influencers. Influencers. That's who you're writing for. So let's be absolutely crystal clear on the target demographic that we are now writing for with the documentation, whatever it may be documentation for. If it's web development documentation, you are writing for influencers. You see, the idea is that the influencers, and I'm talking about influencers of the web development genre, I'm sure you've seen these YouTube channels where people do tutorial after tutorial after tutorial. They've got a gazillion followers. And it's this week we're going to be looking at the such and such framework, right? That's your target audience. Now, you may say, but what about the average person who wants to learn the technology? They're not reading the docs. That's the big news flash. If they were reading the docs and learning it by going from the docs, through the docs from start to finish, if that was the case, Udemy would be out of business. Think about it. Think about the stuff that you've learned. Are you telling me that maybe you know some programming language? Did you read the docs from start to finish? Did you even read the start? No, you probably learned like most ordinary people. Maybe you got a nicely written book from somewhere, and that's not documentation. Maybe you watched some YouTube tutorials or took a course, or maybe you went to Treehouse or Udemy or someplace like that. But ordinary users of the technology do not read. Well, they do use the docs for reference purposes, but they don't read the docs in the sense of chapter 1, getting started. It never, ever happens. Think about the way that people learn technology, right? How people learn about web development technologies. The way that it works is generally they'll find out about the technology. So maybe they'll find out about it. Okay, so there's this great new thing that's just been released. Maybe they'll find out about it on the news, YouTube, whatever, who knows where. Then they'll do a bunch of research. Then they'll usually maybe try a YouTube tutorial or two, something like that. Or they'll have a little investigation. Then they'll either do a course, something like Udemy, or buy a book on the subject. And buying a book is very different from documentation, because if you buy a book, it's nicely written and it'll have examples and stuff. That's how people learn web development technologies. And once they've done a course and bought a book, they'll either go on and start using the thing, or maybe they'll do another course and get another book, But that's how people learn. Now, if we think about this part of the process here, try a YouTube tutorial. That is sort of like the entry point to the learning experience, right? So most people who are, let's say, learning React, they're going to watch a tutorial maybe from a guy like Brad Traversy, and it'll show them how to do a to-do list or something, and here's a tutorial on React. And most people will have that as the on-ramp. This is what gets them on board with the technology. And what happens is the influencers, this is our key word of the day, the influencers. I'm going to have typos all over here and it's going to be embarrassing. But the influencers are sort of like the gatekeepers of the technology. They're the ones that let people come on board. And if you don't believe that, just go look at those types of channels. Channels like Web Dev Simplified. There's so many of them. And just look at the amount of views they're getting. They're getting millions and millions of views. So that's where people go. Then, if the people who see the tutorial think, oh, this is kind of nice, then they move forward. Now, if you happen to be in the business of being an influencer, you'll agree that it's a good thing if you can bring value to the table. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's that kind of an obvious thing, but they want to bring value to the table so that loads and loads of people go to their on-ramp and watch their channel and say, oh, that was fantastic. Thanks. Oh, thanks for showing me how to do a to-do list. That is beautiful. So they want to get as many people as possible on board. And to do that, they have to deliver value. Now, I've spent time on Twitter looking at some of the top influencers of the web development genre. And you know what they spend a whole lot of time doing? More than you and me? Influencers read docs. That's what they do. And if you don't believe me, go look them up on Twitter. They read the docs, right? And they'll say, oh, I just spent my weekend reading the docs for such and such. It's the influencers, the Traverses, the Web Dev Simplifieds and all of them. There's a whole bunch more of them. They're the ones who sit up at night reading the docs. The influencers will read the docs from start to finish. Now, the influencers will almost certainly not use the technology. They're going to just learn how to do a to-do list with React or something and then move on to the next thing. That's the life of an influencer, right? As far as this genre of ours goes. But the influencers read the docs. Now, here's the most mind-blowing statement that you'll ever hear when it comes to this topic. If you write docs that are easy to understand, clear, and well written, then you have just deprived an influencer of an opportunity. Print that off and put it on your wall. Because it took me 2 years to figure this out. And I'll say it again. If you write docs that are easy to understand, clear, and well written, then you have just deprived an influencer of an opportunity. So, going back to the Trongate docs, the first docs, one of my greatest failures in my career. One of the challenges is that it goes through what is routing, what is a controller, the structure of a controller, understanding view files, an example of a view file being used. Now, all of that's good. But in this instance, I made the worst mistake that you can possibly make when it comes to documentation. And that is, I made it easy. I wrote in a manner that is friendly, as if I'm talking to a friend. And I'm saying, I mean, look at the screenshot. Hello, it's nice to see you. So all of the documentation, look at how clear it is. I made it easy. And some of you think, well, that's great. But it's not great, because that means that if the influencer then appears on YouTube and says, okay, today I'm going to show you a tutorial on how to do a view file in the Trongate framework, let's say. If an influencer posts that video, everybody's going to be going, well, what's the point? We already know. Here it is. Why are you going to teach us that, you idiot? Teach us something that we don't know. This is the gig. This is the secret little dance that nobody ever talks about. So, when you write docs, you and all of those influencers are comrades in bullshit. That's right. You have to make those docs so shit that only somebody with a huge financial incentive to stay up reading them would. Some of you are a little bit shocked, but I'm telling you, this is the rules of the game. Welcome. Welcome to the planet Earth. And if that's not worth a like, a thumbs up, and a double subscribe, then I don't know what is. I'm giving you the information that nobody else is talking about. So, docs. When you write docs, the business of writing docs, or writing docs, is a game. You are now playing a little game. Welcome. And the aim of the game is to write something that is appealing to an influencer and that will give an influencer value. So, when you write your documentation, don't think about the average asshole who's going to use the framework. Think about the Derek Banas characters. Think about now I'm a bit out of touch, but think about those characters. All of those YouTubers with a gazillion subscribers. And your goal is, you want to give the influencer an opportunity to have value. And how's that? Well, it's a game. And your role in the game is that you have to set up a situation where the influencer can win. So, take this here, right? An example, and I could have picked up from a whole bunch of pages, right? But if I take this page here, and I don't know, maybe I'll keep it, but this page leaves nothing on the table. There is nothing on the table at all. Now compare that to the documentation for something like, now let me think of a technology here, something like Loop Back. Okay, Loop Back documentation. I believe they were acquired by IBM. And let's just go with, let's see, how about inside a Loop Back application? Right, we'll just read here. I mean, this is genuinely random. Digital transformation is changing how data services are shared across web, mobile, IoT platforms. Right, stop right there. That sentence is horrible. It would have been better written if it had said web, comma, mobile, comma, and IoT platforms. And as you go through documentations like this, and I know these documentations, I've been through them, and it's horrendous. And it's some of the worst reading that you'll ever have. It's no, actually, Fastway, okay. I'm not going to go through this and try and find duff sentences, but this is actually they made a fundamental mistake in this one. Maybe this is good docs. Maybe they've changed it, because I was looking at Loop Back 3 before, and it was the worst docs I'd ever seen. Might have even been Loop Back 2. Anyway, the point is, we're all playing a little. I don't want to pick on Loop Back. I apologise, but we're playing a little game, and we want to set up a situation where the influencer can win. And so that means that we have to do two things. One is we have to write in a manner that is formal and professional, and actually suitable for technical documentation. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. And the second thing is we have to write with brevity. So think about that influencer who's staying up in the middle of the night and saying, I'm going to have to go through these docs this weekend. That's the guy, by the way, or the gal, who's going to go through the whole thing from start to finish, right? So write with brevity. They don't need to know about the history of PHP. They don't need to know how to set up XAMPP. It's enough to just say we are using XAMPP. That's it, right? So write with brevity. Do them that favour, but write in a manner that's formal and professional and actually well suited for technical documentation. So now we're getting to the I suppose the important stuff, right? And that is, what are the hallmarks of well-written docs? Well, the first thing is, I said, keep the tone professional, keep the tone formal and appropriate for something that is technical in nature. And the first rule, and by the way, the look back documentation I looked at, they've broken this rule. So I think they've actually made the mistake of producing well-written docs. Well, tough luck, guys, because maybe they should go back to the old docs. Because what you want to do is, rule number 1, avoid usage of words like you, me, we, our. So, if you start, for example, with, in this chapter, we are going to learn, that's teaching, and it's informal. It's not technical. It's not suitable for docs. So instead of saying, in this chapter we're going to learn, you could say something like, this chapter will describe. Something like that. So we're getting rid of we are going to learn. Okay, so we're getting rid of, in this chapter we're going to learn all of the playground stuff, replacing it with, this chapter will describe, or better still, this chapter describes. And we're avoiding these words as much as possible. Now, sometimes you will need to say these words. You open your computer or whatever. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but try your best to avoid using these words. It's so important. Now, when you do that, and by the way, you can take stuff, like you could take a section here. So let's take, let's take this here. We could take something like this and very easily chuck it through your favorite little bot and say, could you make the following text more appropriate for technical documentation by removing words like you, I, our, and we? And then the idea is you'd paste in your article. ChatGPT does a really good job of this stuff. And there you go, right? So look at what it's now given us. So upon initial installation, Trongate loads the Welcome module controller by default. The downloaded Trongate framework includes the Welcome controller with the following code. Now, that, from a tonality perspective, is not as warm as my nice, friendly, and fuzzy, as a reminder. As a reminder, when you download the Trongate, your controller will contain the following. You see, that's well written, actually. But remember, well written does not mean good docs. You save this stuff. This stuff belongs in a tutorial, not in technical documentation. So we're getting rid of the as a reminder and you do this and your controller and that. And now we've got upon initial installation, Trongate loads, blah, 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 blah. So that is key. Avoid words like those, like I've just shown you. 2 would be, now this is just one you don't have to, but I would recommend use AI. So something like ChatGPT is really, really good at this. It can take something that's well written, like my well written docs, and it can turn it into something that is badly written and actually perfect for documentation. So this is key. And there we go. Now, most people, when they read text that looks like this, how are they going to feel? If you do pages, say you do 200 pages of this, how are most people going to feel? Kind of cold. Kind of like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm feeling this. This doesn't seem too friendly. But who cares? That's not the target audience. In fact, how about this? If you do get that kind of reaction, congratulations. You want to put as many people off reading these docs as possible. So the vibe is you're making the docs difficult enough that the average user is going to just say, I don't want to look at this. But the influencer, your best friend, is going to look and say, oh, perfect, I can tune into this during the weekend. So avoid words like you, me, blah, 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 and all of that stuff. And use AI to formalize the text. Now, I think that's, funnily enough, I thought I had more to say, but I think that's about it. The best thing that I could add as well is, for me, I've discovered that it's helpful if you imagine it when you're writing as it's like a courtroom, and I'm sure you've seen those courtroom dramas on TV where somebody will talk and they'll say, well, actually, blah, 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 blah. And then some lawyer will shout, objection. And they'll say, objection, speculative, or something like that, Well, try to imagine the same thing going on when you're writing documentation. So the moment you drift into something that is an opinion or out with the scope of the documentation or something, in your mind, imagine a little lawyer saying, objection, Your Honour, out with the scope of the documentation. And as you go on and say, let's say you go like this and you say, Trongate is so much better than the other frameworks, just look at these benchmarks. Again, objection, Your Honour, opinion. So this is the vibe. This is the vibe. So I could actually go on and talk more and talk about the difference between documentation versus a tutorial, but I hope I've given you enough to get started with this. Now I'm going to ditch in or throw in an apology for Dom. This is my good friend Dom Sinclair, because he had very kindly submitted about, I don't know, a whole bunch of file changes over the weekend for the new Trongate documentation. And by the way, the new Trongate documentation is excellent documentation. Don't read it. It's not for you. It's for the influencers, you see. But the new documentation is great. Whereas the old documentation, and there's been so many of these iterations, waffles about revolutions and stuff, the new documentation just goes like this. a little quote, and a quote from Terry Davis, and then straight into the good stuff. That's good documentation. And if I click on one of the pages that's done, I'm not saying the word you or your. I'm getting straight to the business end, and I'm imagining that I'm talking to an influencer at 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe over the weekend. And they'll just see, normally the controllers directory within a given module will contain one PHP file. They'll look at that and they'll be like, fine, great, I love it. And I'm giving the influencers an opportunity to be the hero. Do you remember what I was saying? It's a game. So we're setting it up so that they can win. So that they can read all of this miserable stuff. And then in a week or two, they can say, great news, I've done a tutorial on how to use such and such. And everybody will say, oh, you're such a genius. Thank you. Thank you. So that's who we are written for, who we are writing for. And when it comes to teaching, when it comes to actually legitimately teaching your technology, well, that's when you go back to YouTube and books and tutorials and courses and all of that stuff. But we're not in the business of teaching people when we write docs. I really hope that you get that. The other thing that I wanted to say, actually, there was a third point. If it's not in the docs, it doesn't exist. So another mistake that I made, and I think other people make, is when they're writing technical documentation, they don't mention stuff and they just assume that people will figure it out. They'll look in the code. So in the case of Trongate, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I never got round to mentioning. I never mentioned the out function, for example. I never mentioned custom pagination templates. None of that was in the docs, but it's in the framework and nobody knows, So it's really important when you do technical documentation to document every single public facing method or function. Now, you don't have to. And do you want to see what a well documented method or function looks like? I'll show you. Like this. You see? So everything, we've got a function signature, a description, parameters, default values, all of that stuff, and an example, and of course an indication of the return value. That is documenting a method. A method's obviously a function inside a class, and it's doing so perfectly. So, documentation, good documentation should have that. If you've got a bunch of helpers, every single one should be documented, and it should follow. You don't have to copy my own structure here, but it should be formalized. And you see how the pattern here is the same? Doesn't matter where you go, it's always the same type of pattern. And it's factual, there's no waffle here, right? So if it's not in the docs, it doesn't exist. So that's the other thing, document every public facing thing. Now in the framework, there's private methods and protected and all of that. You don't have to document that stuff because that's internal. That's stuff that the framework figures out. But if there's something that says public function, blah, blah, it has to be referenced. And if it does not, then it does not exist. So going back to Dom, and I apologize. Dom, who is a channel member, hello Dom from England. I like to think of Dom as a friend of mine. He did a whole bunch of work over the weekend on the documentation. And he submitted some pull requests, or I think he put one of them in one pull request, but it had a massive amount of changes. And he spent a lot of time on this. And I declined the pull request. And not only did I decline the pull request, but I declined it and gave him a rant, which was entirely inappropriate. So I want to apologise to Dom for that. But like any proper apology, I'm going to explain what went wrong, why this went wrong, and what steps have been taken to make sure this never happens again. So, in the case of Dom, what went wrong? Well, Dom, God bless him, he spent ages working. I mean, I'm going to say ages, there's a lot of files that had been changed. So he spent ages working on the docs, and the pull request was declined with a rant. Okay, we're not doing this. No, I'm not playing it. I've had it. You know. So that's what went wrong. Now, what happened that caused the thing to go wrong? Well, apart from me, being a little bit obnoxious or whatever, Dom made two mistakes. The first mistake is, and I wonder if I can show his pull request. I think it's closed. It's a shame. But he made two mistakes. The first mistake is that he went through the existing docs, at least some of the existing chapters, and he sort of played the part of William Shakespeare. And there was a lot of like, oh, I think we could rephrase that better. And I don't know about the wording of this. You've said, there are lots of files in the directory. Maybe you should have said there are many files in the directory, that type of thing, And he did all of these kind of wordsmithing things, And it was all fine. But the trouble is that the stuff that he was wordsmithing, oh, I think that could be worded better. I think this could be worded better. All of that stuff had actually been produced by ChatGPT. So there were no typos, there were no fundamental grammatical errors or anything like that. It was basically just wordsmithing bullshit. Now, don't get me wrong. I've probably made spelling mistakes all over this. I get that. And if I have, people will forgive that. But I don't want to get into a position. I mean, by all means, if there's a typo, a grammatical error, if somebody says a lot like this, why do people do that? Everybody thinks that's one word. It's not, or an apostrophe in the wrong place. By all means, please let us know. Fix that. Do pull requests. But scratching around the hen house, wondering if, could I maybe reword that a little bit better? Could we do that? Could we do that? That is low value, especially if the thing has already gone through AI and me. And if I humour that wordsmithing, if I go, oh, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I'm so glad that we changed the word from first to firstly, or we changed firstly to begin, comma. Like, if we do that, we'll be here next Christmas, and it sets up a pattern of bullshit. A pattern of bullshit whereby one day I'm on the beach admiring the grass skirts as they gently sway left to right. And suddenly William Wordsworth appears and says, oh, by the way, I've decided we can shuffle this one around. No, William Wordsworth. We're not playing that game. I'm not humouring it. Pull request declined. The second mistake that Dom made is he went out with the scope of the documentation. So, went out with the scope of the docs. So one of the things that I read from Dom, and maybe he was rewording an old article that I had written because I've made this mistake, but one of the first things I read was this. It was from memory. One of the most contentious subjects in web development is what choice of IDE or text editor you should use, you know. And then it went on and said there are a variety in the marketplace, and here they are, and it listed them all with pros and cons. That is out with the scope of the docs. If we humour that, we go back to this, like the original docs. We end up with this brilliantly written but tragically ignored piece of work. And we're not going back. We're not going back to Welcome to the Revolution and Trongate's better than Laravel and all of that. Those days have gone. I've made my point. If anybody wants to go look at the benchmarks or whatever or do a comparison, they're welcome. But the time has come to move on. And we're not having docs that are just like, oh, one of the most contentious subjects. Okay, so immediately you're causing division. And the other thing is, remember I said that the target is the influencer. What influencer wants to read that? They're just going to go, oh God, I need to talk about this. Apologies if I used the Lord's name in vain there. I need to go through all of this stuff about text editors before I get to the docs. And I'm guilty of doing this all the time. And I'm guilty of this for sure. None of these things are productive. And also, Dom, that genius, that son of a gun, he had too much focus on writing well. And when I saw those pull requests from Dom, I saw myself. Because that's exactly the kind of stuff that I would have produced 2 years ago. Far too much focus on writing well. So, I don't know if you're paying attention, Dom, but if you're reading, welcome. Welcome to my world. And isn't it beautiful that you don't have to go through the pain of writing 200 pages, hanging about being ignored for 2 years, until one day you figure all of this stuff out? So, what do we do now? Well, what went wrong? What happened? And what next? Well, I've pretty much laid it out. The first thing is we have to write in a manner rather that is appropriate for technical documentation. So that means no opinions, right? So none of this, I mean, like I say, I love my pictures here. I love all of these benchmarks and that, but that's opinions, right? The subject of which IDE to use is one of the most contentious topics in web development. No. Objection, Your Honor. Objection. Opinionated. Do you see what I'm saying? So you have to be really, really harsh on yourself. No opinions. That's the first thing. Next, know the target audience. And I've just told you the greatest secret in all of docs. Nobody told you before. You could search here, there, everywhere, and nobody's talking about this. I'm the guy who gives you... You thought that this would be a boring video on documentation, and in the end I gave you the ultimate conspiracy theory. Because it's a game. And the target audience is not the average person learning, it's influencers. Influencers of the genre. And I can assure you, they don't want to know that text editors are the most contentious subject. If they see that, they're going to say, fuck that shit. That's what they're going to say. So the target audience is influencers. Now, because the target audience is influencers, we have to write with brevity. So, no waffle, no articles about the state of web development, no, blah, 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 blah. Write with brevity. And again, to go back to one of my own failures, And I spotted it earlier. When I'm talking about a few words about code in a way that makes you feel good, yay, relax, you're using Trongate. No, that is too informal. So that was my mistake, you know? So do not write in a friendly manner, actually. Let's just say it. Don't write in a friendly manner. I want people to look at the documentation and say, "Oh, this is horrible." And then I want them to go watch Brad Traversy or somebody like that do a beautiful tutorial that they'll love. And then maybe they'll buy a course. And then maybe in the future, if they start using the technology, maybe they'll use the docs as a reference just to say, no, we're going to just double check. Has it got a feature for this? That's fine. But we're not trying to appeal to the average character learning the technology. I'm amazed that I'm giving you this. This is pure gold, by the way. This is pure gold. Because remember, writing docs is a game. We are making a situation here that lets the influencers win. So we write with brevity. We do not write in a friendly manner. So as much as possible, we're avoiding you, I, we, and so on. We're formalizing it, and we want to turn as many people off as possible. We want them to look at the docs and say, "Oh, this is horrible." And you want to know the funny thing? You want to know the funny thing? When you do all of this stuff, you're going to get compliments. The universe is a strange place, but it's true. These original docs here that took me so long, do you know how many people have says to me, "Oh, I really love these docs"? You know how many people? Or I like them? Or just any positive comment. Would you like to know how many? Rounded to the nearest integer, 0. 0. The new docs, where on earth are they? Now, I've only done the first few chapters here, but the new docs are formalized. When I mention code, it's clearly indicated when I'm discussing code, as you can see. When I talk about something like, let's say, and I do have an example I can show you. When I mention something like using a certain method, I'll do this, and I'll have my reference here that people can check. By the way, I apologize for this. My name, this is an old remnant from the old docs. That's coming out. I don't want my name anywhere. My name will not be anywhere. I'm embarrassed that that even came up on this video. So I'm going to be taking all of that stuff out. And we want to make the docs formal, kind of steely cold. We want brevity, and we do not want to go out with the scope of the documentation. So it's not, and I know it sounds strange. I want to write a thing about here's how to set up PHP. You know, I'd love to write this. It's in, and it's probably in your nature because you're a good person who writes well, by the way, writes brilliantly. I can recognize that, and I appreciate that. These are dying arts, and I really appreciate it. And I admire the talent and the skill and the intellect that it requires. But we're not in the business of good writing. We're in the business of docs. I had said previously, number of compliments I got for this, the old docs, 0. As for the new docs, every time I show this up on a live stream, somebody's saying, "Oh, I'm really loving the new docs." Kind of strange that, isn't it? So I suppose that leaves with a funny old thing, a funny old thought. You know, it has just occurred to me that if you headed down, let me just write this phrase here, the law of expectation. Yeah, the law of expectation. If you were down there in Soho and you headed, when there's a full moon, you headed down where the neon lights are, and you find yourself in a strip club, and you say, okay, I'm taking a walk on the wild side. And I haven't been to a strip club, by the way, if any of my family are listening or anything. I have not. But my speculation is that if you did that and you paid whatever they do for a lap dance, was it £2? I don't know. you go in a strip club and you say, give me a lap dance. And you're waiting there. And then suddenly somebody comes out, some gal, and she says, hi, I'm Molly. And she looks like she's dressed from the gal from the Little House on the Prairie. That's going to freak you out. That's going to freak you out. Because as charming as Molly may be, Molly, by having the demeanour of somebody who is from the Little House on the Prairie, has just violated the law of expectation, you see. So when you go into that Soho strip club and you pay your £2 for your lap dance, you're not expecting little Molly from the Little House of the Prairie. You're expecting Miss Whiplash with her leathers and all of that other regalia. You see what I'm saying? It may not be what you're into in the cold light of day, but there is a certain thing here that we have to acknowledge called the law of expectation. So when people look at docs, they have an expectation of steely cold, you know, brevity, no formality or anything. That's the expectation. And I've still got a long way to go with these docs, but I've been getting compliments, and I'm telling you, man, I'm on the right track. So, whatever we do, let's always comply with the law of expectation. People are not expecting, oh, one of the most contentious subjects. No, they expect you to be an asshole. So that's pretty much the conclusion of the video. Be an asshole. Okay. Thank you very much for writing. Reading, writing, whatever you're doing. And if I did not entirely finish my apology with Dom, well, look, that's what went wrong. I see myself because I made all of the same mistakes that Dom was made. And I have to nip this shit in the bud because I don't want to be here in 2 years' time. And Dom's like, what am I doing? I've written everything brilliant and why is it not going down well? I'm saving you 2 years of bullshit by giving you this information. And I'll tell you something, I'm your best friend for talking like this. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you soon.